Hello and welcome. My name is Carrie, and I am the Communications Officer at the Regional District of Central Okanagan. Before we move into the topics at hand, please know our hearts go out to all who have been affected by the McDougall Creek wildfire. It's been a long road, and the staff involved at the RDCO are here to do what we can to support residents as they rebuild their lives. On behalf of all of us here today, I'd like to acknowledge our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of the Syilx Okanagan people, who have resided here since time immemorial. We recognize, honor, and respect the Syilx Okanagan lands upon which we live, work, and play. As you are aware, several key issues on the Lake Okanagan Resort property must be addressed prior to the redevelopment stage. And in this information video, we will do our best to provide residents with information to guide them through the redevelopment process and share where RDCO can support and areas that sit with our regulatory agencies and private landowners. Thank you to those that have submitted questions. We appreciate your thoughtfulness and respectful questions, and we will do our best to answer them here, but also will provide a Q&A document for future reference. Now, I'd like to introduce the team we have today to share information on the rebuilding process. I'm joined by Ron Matusi, an emergency management recovery expert for local government. Ron will provide an overview of the roles and areas of responsibility of those involved in the rebuilding process. Travis Kendall, Associate Director of Development and Engineering Services at the RDCO, will discuss more specifics about utilities and power requirements and some of the barriers and opportunities to address. Danielle Noble-Brandt, Director of Development and Engineering Services from the RDCO, will also discuss the building permit process. I would like to turn it over now to Ron Matusi.
Thank you, Carrie. First off, I'd like to echo Carrie's sympathies for everyone involved. I've dealt with a number of recovery efforts, and it's never easy. There's a lot of unknown questions and a lot of frustration, and the process usually takes a lot longer than anybody would like. So again, my heart goes out as well. Having said that, I think part of what we're trying to do today is may not be able to provide quick solutions or quick answers, but at least be able to provide clarity for which you can make your decisions on how you wish to move forward. So to date, actually a lot has gone on in the background, as you could imagine. I don't have to tell members of the audience how difficult and complex this issue is, but the regional district, through its recovery efforts, has been compiling information, trying to work with various provincial agencies, trying to, in fact, sort out who has control and who has the decision-making powers when it comes to various aspects of this problem, and trying to create really a map or a path. As I said before, the path isn't an easy one, and there's still unknowns in the equation, but I think we've at least been able to map out the process moving forward as well as the players. So I'd like to go through that. But first, concentrating on the roles, the regional district of Central Okanagan has really two roles in a disaster. One is to open up the Emergency Operations Center, which every disaster, every fire, flood you hear about. And their job is to support the incident, so support the firefighters or the public works people dealing with flooding, as well as coordinate evacuations if they're necessary. They also coordinate post-emergency recovery efforts, working with emergency social services and NGOs like the Red Cross, Salvation Army, and actually a score of agencies out there that try to help in the immediate post wildfire or post disaster, trying to support people's immediate needs. The reality is the regional district, Central Okanagan, or any regional district or municipality really has no pool of funds or budget to support business and individuals with their rebuild. Even the funding for the actual emergency work that the regional district does is provided by the province through Emergency Management BC. The province and the federal government do not provide funding for insurable events, and so therein lies often one of the problems in post wildfire recovery. Fires are insurable events. unlike floods. So funds, which are from time to time, and you hear about this in the media that the federal government's announced funding, that usually comes through disaster financial assistance, the DFA, but it's targeted at local governments and First Nations and really targeted at rebuilding critical public infrastructure. So you do hear big money, big numbers being mentioned, but that money is focused on infrastructure, not individuals. The situation with the Lake Okanagan Resort is difficult for any level of government to deal with. First off, because it's a wildfire incident and therefore insurable. But secondly, it's a privately owned and operated resort, which means all levels of government are somewhat limited in their ability to help private business for this type of event. The other role the regional district has is a regulatory one, which you're probably more familiar with, and that's they're the agency in this area for planning. So those planning tools are zoning and development permits, as well as the actual building permit, which is required for any reconstruction. There were questions around the Bearland strata. I just want to acknowledge that the regional district isn't the subdivision approving authority. The local governments are, but regional district do not have subdivision processing powers. And on that note, I'd also like to point out there were a number of questions that they were somewhat legal in nature, and we really can't answer those. We're not in any position, we're not lawyers to provide legal advice, nor, because of our role as regulators, can we recommend alternative infrastructure solutions. We suggest that the Lake Okanagan Resort and the stratas, either together or collectively in some form, really work together to obtain the required qualified professionals who in fact may look at alternatives to providing those much needed services. One of the questions that has come up time and time again is whether the RDCO can force Lake Okanagan to rebuild. But there's really no power within the Local Government Act that would allow the regional district to do that. Nor can we bypass those regulators, in fact, that are in a position to have to be the deciding body on what, in fact, type of infrastructure could be approved or the nature of the solutions. So we can't bypass it, and nor can we speak on behalf of those agencies. So part of our role here is coordination. So moving forward, we're going to be trying to focus on what's ahead as opposed to the past. What the RDCO can continue to do is work with those agencies, providing information two-way to the agencies and back to the group. Work with the IHA, the Lake Okanagan Resort, the stratas, collectively or individually, and to help everyone understand the steps that are necessary to rebuild. Within the area of planning, that's zoning and development permits, every effort will be made within the bounds of legislation that we have to work within to be as flexible and solutions oriented as possible and really try to solve the problems. So let's go and look at the process chart. Notice that at the very top is a navy blue box, and that really talks about site stabilization and ensuring that if there's any remediation that has to be done, particularly to those areas where there are no standing buildings or the surrounding area, that should be the first step. The other boxes on the right-hand side of that are the green ones, really speak to development permits, which are through the official community plan are needed, as well as archaeological assessment. And later in the process, we'll go into some detail on, and Danielle will be able to speak to those two processes, which are both necessary and could be run concurrent with some of the other processes. But really, this is an area that I think that working together as either a collective of stratas or the Lake Okanagan Resort and these stratas is a better approach to approach this, so that in fact things like the development permit becomes much easier if everybody is complying and everybody is following the same process. So let's look at some of the other boxes. Really, there's two starting positions. One is whether or not the structure was stable or it's compromised. I think it's really important that a qualified professional in those cases um, be able to look at the structure and assess whether or not there's been post-fire damage as a result of freezing pipes, mold, those types of things that could happen when a building is not occupied over a long period of time. If after those inspections, a qualified professional determines that in fact there needs to be remediation, then that may require a renovation permit if there's actual construction that takes place as part of that. If the building is stable and occupiable at that point, we now move through the three areas that would be required before either a building permit process and or occupancy. And they're really the big three that I think everybody understands. You know, the first is power. Working with BC Hydro to replace critical electrical infrastructure. A reminder that we recognize again the complexity of the site. Some of the stratas may in fact have access to power. Others may require some form of easement through Lake Okanagan Resort. But that's really the first step, and you'll see as we move through these, the power is actually essential for the next two pieces of the building blocks of infrastructure. Water comes under the jurisdiction of Interior Health and the Ministry of the Environment. The reactivation of the intake will require power. Whether the intake is suitable and all those types of things are something that, again, a qualified professional working with Interior Health and would really have to be able to comment on to get it to a point where now the regional district is satisfied that you in fact have potable water to whatever building you may be applying for the building permit. And the same is basically true for wastewater. The wastewater treatment on the site has to meet a particular provincial standard and has to be brought up to that standard before building permits could be issued. The regional district must know that in fact they have an approved wastewater treatment system of some sort on the site. So those are the big three. Those are the three things, and none of those are really unknowns. The fourth area is really hazard removal. And we know, having been on site, that a lot of the material has been, there is a lot of demolition and remediation that's been taking place. The main structure was a concern, but we've now been told by Lake Okanagan Resort at our last meeting that they are demolishing that, or they will be demolishing that. So we look forward to working through that part of the process. So once the critical infrastructure, in whatever form that happens to be, gets reestablished, at that point, we move into the area of development permit and building permits. So I'd like to now turn it over to Danielle to go through that part of the process.
Actually, Ron, I'd like to just maybe have Travis handle that part and then we'll go to Danielle.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Happy to. Thanks, Ron. You covered a lot of ground on critical infrastructure there. So I'm just going to hit a few highlights and then pass it over to Danielle. But as Ron mentioned, the RDCO's role in rebuilding is issuing building permits. And before we can issue those permits to start construction, critical infrastructure needs to be reestablished. The RDCO has been coordinating with government agencies to facilitate critical infrastructure progress and communication. But the RDCO does not regulate private utility systems, and the RDCO does not have oversight of private utility systems. Within Lake Okanagan Resort, the specific critical infrastructure required to facilitate rebuild is water, sewer, and electricity. Rebuilding of critical infrastructure is the responsibility of its owner. On private land, That private critical infrastructure is the responsibility of the private landowners. At Lake Okanagan Resort, that infrastructure is owned nearly entirely by a private company. If the resort chooses not to rebuild that critical infrastructure, there are alternatives or temporary options that could be put in place to enable the rebuilding of homes. But as Ron's outlined, those really need to be fully explored with the regulators at Interior Health and the Ministry of Environment, in addition to BC Hydro. The RDCO and everybody here, we really want everybody to reach the building permit process so that you can return home. Our teams are ready to help and prioritize your rebuilding once those on-site private critical infrastructure systems are reestablished. Our hearts go out to you. We know this has been a struggle, and we're here to help wherever we can, wherever we have the power to do so. That's all for me. Danielle, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Travis. You've examined kind of the necessary infrastructure. And once we've concluded those steps, the RDCO is here to help you with both your development and building permit process approvals. A demolition permit is going to be the first step in the process to ensure that proper waste disposal and remediation requirements have been met prior to construction. Each property owner is responsible for their own demolition process and permit application. The regional district has waived those costs associated with demolition permits to assist with this initial activity to get your property cleaned up and safety reestablished. Of note, the entire Lake Okanagan Resort property is subject to a form and character development permit. This development permit evaluates any building's form and character with the established urban design guidelines. If you intend to rebuild exactly the same form of building as was previously there, a development permit exemption will be granted to skip this step. The next step would be a building permit application, which is required for all new buildings. Please ensure that your building permit application complies with the current zoning on the subject property. The Lake Okanagan Resort is currently zoned CD2, and this zone establishes all of the development regulations for the entire site. For your own knowledge, there are online GIS mapping and land use links on the regional district's website that provide links to those land use mapping and bylaws that apply. Applications can be made either online or in person. We encourage you to refer to the building permit application checklist to ensure that all the required documentation is included with your application. Only complete applications will be accepted. Staff acknowledge that each strata is going to pursue their own rebuilding path, and some questions have come in with respect to rezoning options. As I've shared, the Lake Okanagan Resort property is currently regulated by the CD2 zone. And should a strata come forward to pursue a land use or development regulation that is contrary to the existing zone, the regional district would consider the merits of changes to the sub-areas in the CD zone on a case-by-case basis. As already shared, we have dedicated staff that are on hand to help guide residents and members of the construction industry through this rebuilding process. I'd like to hand it over to Carrie.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. I'll stop sharing. Before we wrap up, we would like to answer some of the questions that were submitted. Please note that we've covered the majority of the questions throughout the presentation. Questions that were more legal in nature should be referred to legal experts. So this information video will remain available for future reference on the RDCO's website. There are 3 themes that were asked most frequently, and we will go through those now. Travis, this one is for you. Does RDCO have an option of taking over the infrastructure for the area?
The RDCO utility acquisition policy doesn't have the option to take infrastructure. It has to be freely given and fully funded. So that same policy outlines the process that requires that the majority of the utility customers and the owners request that the RDCO investigate the feasibility of the RDCO taking on that infrastructure. It requires the consent of the owner to continue that process. There's also a requirement within that policy that the utility itself be free of any legal entanglement. So I guess the short answer is no, the RDCO does not take infrastructure, but we do have ability to take it over if supported by the owners, our board, and its customers. That policy is available on our website for those that want to research it more. And just again, it's called the RDCO Utility Acquisition Policy. That's all.
Great. Thank you, Travis. Danielle, this question is for you. It reads, our building is within 50 meters of an archaeological site. What would this mean for rebuilding? If we were to rebuild in the same location in the same type of building, would it be easier to get the permitting after the infrastructure is built?
Thanks, Carrie. The archaeology review is governed under the Heritage Conservation Act and is therefore a provincial function. There are known archaeological sites located within 50 meters of the Lake Okanagan Resort property. The province is committed to supporting residents in rebuilding their homes. And to facilitate this, the archaeology branch is developing a wildfire structure heritage investigation permit to support the expedited rebuild. If you're interested in having your work completed under this permit, your chosen consulting archaeologist would be able to further advise and liaise directly with the archaeology branch. You can also apply for a standard permit, and it's advised that this standard process and issuance takes approximately 20 to 40 weeks. The permit application includes review by the archaeology branch staff, a referral to First Nations, and subsequent engagement. And for more general information about these two processes, you can visit the archaeology branch website. Thanks, Carrie.
Thanks, Danielle. And Ron, this question is for you. Can RDCO influence BC assessment to drop property tax on properties that cannot rebuild due to disasters?
Thank you, Carrie. Well, the short answer is no, but the good news is that BC Assessment, who is an independent provincial authority, and so that's one of the reasons why it can be influenced. It does post-disaster, in fact, reassess the properties at their post-disaster assessment levels, which ultimately will impact taxes. A good example in the village of Lytton, your average home was $150,000 for improvement in land. They were reassessed at about $10,000. And of course, this ultimately will impact taxation by having the lower assessment value. So the short answer is no, they can't influence, but in fact, the properties will be reassessed anyways by BC assessment. Thanks, Carrie.
Okay, good. Thank you, Ron. That concludes our questions. And as we wrap up, strata managers and property owners can stay informed through the website rdco.com/resiliency and subscribe to e-news updates. You can download the process map on our website anytime and refer to your strata manager to receive the contact list for the ministries and agencies. We will also send this information to subscribers via our e-news updates in the coming days. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Any important updates we find helpful to Lake Okanagan Resort property owners, we will keep you informed. However, we strongly recommend stratas and property owners continue to work together. This concludes our information video. We appreciate your time. Thank you.